the conversation going. Hola! Welcome to my presentation, Keep the Conversation Going. My name is Tana Luptak. I teach middle and high school Spanish at Shepherd Middle School and High School, and I live in Shepherd, Montana. It's a small town outside of Billings, Montana. I'm a Department of 1, so I do 6th grade Spanish through Spanish 4, and below you can see my Twitter, my Instagram, and my email if you ever need to contact me. I live in Shepherd with my son, Kason, my husband, Brian, and our 2 dogs, Cooper and Hercules. And I'm also the cheerleading coach at our school. And I'm going into my 7th year of teaching at Shepherd. The goals for this presentation are to get some ideas and strategies for getting your students talking in group conversations, and to feel confident about using these strategies to keep the conversation going if we are online or in a blended learning environment when we start again in the fall. So first I'm going to talk about communication and why it's important, which we're language teachers, so we know communication is important. So here is your interpersonal communication standard from the World Readiness Standards for Language Learning or Learning Languages. Learners interact and negotiate meaning in spoken, signed, or written conversations to share information, reactions, feelings, and opinions. So that is the goal here for keeping the conversation going in the classroom. We want learners to negotiate meaning and be able to communicate and converse back and forth with each other. Communication is one of the 21st century skills, so it's in the 4 C's of learning and innovation skills, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. So communication is a skill that we know students need when they leave our classrooms. And communication is also a big part in social and emotional learning. So according to the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, under relationship skills, the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. This includes communicating clearly, listening actively, cooperating, resisting inappropriate social pressure, negotiating conflict constructively, and seeking and offering help when needed. So communication, clearly important in our everyday lives and in our classrooms, and learning to communicate effectively is something that we want our students to be able to do. So my goals with my students were to not only get them talking more naturally and conversing in the target language, but to also give them an opportunity to practice meaningful conversation, meaningful communication. And through doing that, I realized students don't have the skills to communicate like I just blindly thought they would. I thought, oh yeah, we can sit in a circle and discuss and we'll have some communication going on. But doing my weekly conversation circle, which I'll talk about in a minute, really showed me that the students need a lot of guidance and practice with things like keep the conversation going, don't let it die out, react appropriately to what other people are saying, learning to listen and like wait for your turn, don't interrupt somebody, being polite and understanding and open to others' opinions, and so much more. So the first time I did it, I did this conversation circle, I realized, wow, we have a lot to work on. Not only speaking in the target language, but all of these communication skills and conversation skills that my students didn't have and needed. Okay, so this moves us on to my conversation circle and how it looked in my classroom before school closures. So this is not a brand new idea. I did not come up with this. I'm a department of one, so I do a lot of Googling and Pinterest and searching on like Facebook forums and groups and all this kind of stuff. So I'd seen a lot about the cafe y conversación ideas on social media and in Facebook groups. And I found a guest blog post by Jen Reese on the Mis Clases Locas blog. And so a lot of what I have like adapted for my classroom kind of came from her blog post and some of the resources she shared. So there is the link to that blog post. And again, this is not a brand new idea. It's just how it worked for me in my small school in Montana, being a department of one. So shout out to anyone else who does this. I'd love to hear what you do in your classroom for a conversation circle or getting students talking in a natural way. So here is how it looked in my classroom. Just a little background on my classroom setting. This year I went deskless, so I just have chairs so they can be moved however we want them to be. I teach middle school through Spanish 4, so I have a Spanish 3-4 class, a Spanish 2 class, Spanish 1, and then a middle school class that's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all in one class. So I do this conversation circle with Spanish 2 and Spanish 3-4, at least I did this past year, because they've had more input and more time to really be able to use their language in a situation like this. So usually we take our chairs and put them in a big circle. My Spanish 2 classes this year, one class was 20, the other class was 15. My Spanish 3-4 class was 15 students. So usually we sat in one big group. In one of my classes, it worked better to be in two small groups, and then I sat in the middle in like my swivel chair, and I could just kind of swivel from circle to circle and help them if they needed it. So some of the variations were two small groups or a couple small groups if that's what we needed. One time I did kind of like a speed dating sort of thing, and some students liked that also. So it doesn't have to be a giant, big circle with your students. You can do smaller groups after having it modeled for them after a while. So we did it. Initially, I started in a big group so that they could get the flow and how it would work. And then later on in the year, I could break them up into smaller groups if I needed to. And I do this weekly. So it was on Wednesdays that I did it. Our schedule, like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday are longer days, and Wednesday, Friday are shorter days. So Wednesday was a perfect day right in the middle of the week. It's a short day. So it just fit into the schedule that way. So students come in and they make a drink. So I kind of did it like a cafe y conversación. Grab a drink, sit in a circle, and let's talk. Let's make it a natural conversation. So most of the time they drink hot chocolate, not coffee, but or just brought their waters. And thinking into next year, I'm thinking there will be a lot of restrictions on like food and drink in the classroom. So I'm guessing it'll be everybody bring your own water bottle or drink instead of making the drinks in the classroom. But anyway, so students get the topic ahead of time. So on Monday, usually we would decide on the topic, and I would ask them, "What do you guys want to talk about in on Wednesday?" And the students would yell out topics at me. If they didn't have any, then I would give them the topic. And for deciding on the topic, it could be anything. It didn't have to be what we were learning about. It could, like one time it was Disney movies, and another time it was animals, food, family. So it was whatever they wanted to talk about. If they didn't think of something, I would find something and I would just Google like teenager debate topics and see Like, what could we talk about? Oh, technology usage in the classroom, prom, homecoming, anything that's happening in their lives. So I tried to really make the conversations relevant to their lives and to what we were doing in the classroom, um, so they could know what to be ready for on Wednesday. I would tell them to do some research or figure out what they wanted to say ahead of time so that they felt more prepared, but not many of them did that. They would just come to class and do the best they could with the language they already had. Um, so Monday we got the topic. Wednesday was our conversation day, and that's when they would come in, make a drink, sit in the circle. While they were making a drink, I would have a song playing because I start class with a song every day. So they would listen to their song while they make the drink, sit down. As soon as the song is over, we would start the conversation. And to get this conversation started, I would have a slide up on the projector or smartboard, and it would just have the theme for the day and then sentence starters for them or questions to get them going so that, like, if it was family and they didn't know, like, they were like, oh, I'll talk about my mom, and then everybody gets quiet and they don't know what to talk about anymore, they could look at the board and be like, oh, there's a question I can ask. Like, how old is your mom? Or we can talk about this instead. So I had those that support for them there so that they could just look and keep it going without constantly being like, Senora, please help us, or we don't know what to talk about anymore, or looking to me to like keep the conversation going. I was trying to make it more authentic to where they didn't need the teacher help the whole time. Um, so I had the questions on the board. I would write up helpful vocabulary. Um, I have a handout that I gave them that had different categories like giving your opinion, sentence starters, and reactions like Dios mio or que interesante, things like that. And so they had all these resources with them, and then still, if they needed to ask me, like, how do you say this or what's the word for that, I would help them through it, help them think of a easier way to say it, or I would write the word on the board for them to keep the flow going. So, kind of to recap, students make a drink, sit down in a circle, we have our topic decided, and we just start talking. This year, I usually started the conversation with, like, Bob, what's your favorite animal, if the topic was animals? And then Bob would talk, and then I taught the students how to be like, me too, or um, I agree with Sally. I like horses too because they are blank. And then someone else would, then they would get the conversation going from there. Next year, I'm thinking um, of ways to get the students to start it. I've seen posts about like drawing a stick with their name on it, or like when the discussion starts to dwindle, instead of having the teacher be the one that says, okay, the next question is, pull like a name stick out of your jar and, oh, Sally, it's your turn to keep the conversation going, or Sally, what do you think? So that's kind of how it looked in my classroom. Here is like an example of a slide I would have put up on the board. So they wanted to talk about animals, and I wanted to get past just like, what's your favorite animal? What color's your favorite? Get past those like surface questions and really dig in, like, is it better to buy a pet from a breeder or from a shelter? Or do you think that animals in the world are in danger? Why? Which ones? Do you want more pets? Do you get sad when you see animals treated badly? And it really kind of keeps the conversation going because they can talk about themselves. Like, do you have pets? How many? What are their names? I live in a farming community, so a lot of people have cows and horses and sheep and goats and dogs and chickens, and they could talk all day just about their 20 animals that they have living at home. So it's a personal topic, and then we could dig into like breeder or shelter, mistreatment of animals. So went from personal to kind of like world issues, and this is what I would have up on the board for them to ask each other and then keep the conversation going. And okay, so doing this conversation circle in my classroom really helped my students build a better classroom community. They got to talk to everybody. They were interacting in a more natural way with the target language. They gained confidence in speaking the target language and began to be okay with just speaking and making mistakes because it felt like a safe place where they knew their other classmates weren't going to make fun of them. I'm not grading them for perfection. I'm grading them for, trying and staying in Spanish in the target language. It helped that this past year I finally made the transition to being 90% plus in the target language in the classroom. I had been afraid, but I finally did it. And then like all these new things started happening in my classroom where students were, speaking the language more, and these conversations were made possible. We did them weekly, so it was consistent practice for them. They were motivated to find new things to say and come up with different reactions they could give. They were like, oh, I want to be able to say something else besides me too next time, and things like that. So I enjoyed every Wednesday because we got to sit and just chat. And yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, we weren't in Spanish the entire time because they needed help, or they would turn to me and say, how do you say this word? And I wanted to help them. So I would tell them how to say it, and we would look through it, and we would work through it, and we would just communicate about things that were relevant in their lives or connected to our units. Like our school is getting remodeled or built onto, so we had a whole discussion of like, what does your ideal school look like? What classes would you like to have in our school? What do you think should be put here? What should be put there? And we got to really talk about schools and use our school vocab, but made it personal by talking about our remodel of our school. So this is something for me as a teacher that really helped build that community and got students really invested in learning Spanish for themselves and motivated intrinsically to do these things and converse and not be the one that's speaking English the whole time and things like that. So that was how this conversation circle looks in my classroom. And at the end of the conversation circle, about 5 minutes before class ends, we do a reflection piece. So I made it into a Google form. It was adapted from the blog post on Mis Clases Locas blog by Jen Reese, and I hope I'm saying her last name correctly. But I made it a Google form to save paper, and we have Chromebooks in my classroom, so it's easy. They grab a Chromebook or use their phone, fill it out, and I can grade it really quickly. So they have to tell me conversation topic for the day, their speaking goal. So beforehand, I tell them to think like, how many times do you want to speak today? And then, did you meet your speaking goal? Yes or no? If the student didn't meet their speaking goal, they have to tell me why. So like, you didn't want to talk, other people were talking, you didn't get a chance, didn't have anything to say. Sometimes kids have bad days. I had one girl that, left the class crying because she broke up with her boyfriend. So when she did this, I was having a difficult day and just wasn't feeling it. So I can kind of know like what was happening so that you didn't want to speak today. If they did, they just had to tell me how many times they spoke if they met their speaking goal, and then what did you do during the conversation. I tried to make this part like a interpersonal speaking rubric. Maybe like if you were novice, here's where you'd be. If you were intermediate, here's where you'd be, or whatnot. And then like, oh, did you resort to English? Did you just stay silent? Did you elaborate? Did you respond to questions, ask questions, include others in the conversation? So they see this every week after we do this, and they know what to kind of work towards. And oh, I didn't elaborate. Next time, I'm going to try and elaborate. So then they can tell me what they thought they did well at, and then the goal for their next conversation, and then they give me a score. We still do traditional grades, but I kind of grade on proficiency and points based. It's kind of up in the air. But so then they say what do they think they deserved for their grade that day. And then that's the end of the Google form reflection piece. I then go look at it, grade it, and then we do it all again the next week. And it's really been a very cool part of my classes. I really enjoy Wednesdays. I mean, I enjoy all the days, but Wednesdays are fun. When students leave class on Tuesday, they're excited. Yes, tomorrow is Cafe Conversación. We get to sit in a circle and drink some drinks and just chat, and they don't realize how much they're actually learning when they do that. So how I adapted it when we went online during the COVID school closures, I used Zoom or Google Meet, depending on how my internet was cooperating that day, Flipgrid, and I also did like a normal discussion thread on Google Classroom. So on the Zoom one, it was live. I got to be there. I shared my screen with the questions. I could record it for kids that missed it. We could do breakout groups, and then we were just chatting in a Zoom or Google Meet call in Spanish. The one thing I noticed about the breakout groups was I couldn't see both of them. So I didn't really I had to pop in and out of the breakout groups. So that was kind of interesting. But you can have a student record the breakout group and then send it to you. I used Flipgrid for one of them. So I posted my video in the topic, students post their responses to the question, and then they have to go and give video responses back and forth to each other. So Flipgrid was a good usage of that, and then it was still not instantaneous conversation, but still seeing each other's faces, hearing each other's voices. When we did get online and do the Zoom meet, everybody was excited to see everybody. We got to, finally talk live, and they could all tell me everything that was happening in their lives. Flipgrid, they still see each other. It's just not instantaneous, but they still commented, used their Spanish. The discussion thread was writing in a Google Classroom stream, and they just had to write and then comment on other posts and then reply to people's questions and comments. So just a written discussion thread instead, which I thought worked well. I'm sure a lot of my students used, online translators and Google Translate and stuff like that, but hard to monitor that while you're online. And I figured at least they're still seeing and reading Spanish when they're at home and doing things like that. So changes I am planning on making for next year, I realized I needed to give my students more support and scaffolding ahead of time so that we could minimize the how do you say this? How do you say that? Wait, I don't know this. I don't know that. What is this word? What is that word? What did you just say? And during the conversation. So I'm looking for ways to get them more of that ahead of time so that it minimizes interruption in the conversation. So if you have any things to share with that, that would be great. Student goals. The reflection, they only do afterwards. I think next year I need to do more of a like pre-conversation thing where they actually write down their goals and what they're working towards so that they're a little more invested and can like reflect more authentically. And connection to lessons. So instead of always the totally random topics like Disney movies, I kind of want to work towards connecting them to the goals and themes of the lessons or unit. It doesn't have to be like, oh, we're doing a unit on Cuba, we must only have a conversation about Cuba, because that's not going to be like, that's not relevant to their personal lives in the way of like, oh, tomorrow's prom, let's talk about that. So like kind of just connecting back to those essential questions and things like that in the themes every once in a while would help. But I also do like the authentic random topics of prom, school lunches, things that they might talk about on a daily basis with their friends and things like that, so they can do that in the target language. Just looking at my notes here. Yeah, so if you have any other feedback about changes that I could make to the way I do my conversation circle, I would love to hear them. I love feedback. I like to learn from others. So, gracias, thank you. And if you have any questions, you can contact me, feedback, let me know. If you have other ideas, I would love to hear how you do your conversation circle or cafe conversación or whatever your conversations look like in your classrooms. I would love to see what you do. And I appreciate you listening to my presentation, and hopefully I get to hear from some of you, and I hope you learned something helpful in these crazy times. Here are my resources, and thank you for being part of the 2020 Virtual Summit. Adios.